Elias Carter was knee-deep in a freezing Massachusetts pond in 1845, hacking out 100-pound blocks of ice with a crosscut saw, and he was about to turn a frozen lake into cash in hand. These are the 20 forgotten hustles that built everyday American wealth before anyone was waiting for permission. Before the 9-to-5 became the only story anyone tells, small-town America ran on a completely different economy. There were no corporate job listings, no HR departments, and no such thing as a resume. What there was a dense web of local needs that sharp-eyed people turned into income streams. Farmers, widows, kids, and tradespeople all had side hustles layered on top of whatever their main work was. The system rewarded observation and resourcefulness above everything else. They did not have apps. They had resourcefulness. Let's start with ice harvesting, because this one is almost unbelievable when you hear the numbers behind it. Before mechanical refrigeration existed, every butcher shop, every hotel kitchen, and every wealthy household in America needed ice to keep food from rotting through the summer. Entrepreneurs like the men working the ponds outside Boston would cut massive blocks in January, pack them in sawdust inside insulated ice houses, and then sell them door to door 6 months later at a significant markup. One good winter pond could supply an entire county for a full year. Now here is one that almost nobody talks about: ash collecting. Every fireplace in America produced wood ash every single day, and most families just swept it out and threw it away. But ashmen knew something those families did not. Soap factories and lye producers needed potash, which came directly from wood ash, and they would pay cash for it by the barrel. An ashman would walk a route through town, knock on doors, buy the ash for almost nothing, aggregate it, and sell it to a factory at a serious profit. Zero startup cost. Pure arbitrage. Rag picking sounds like the very bottom of the economic ladder, but the people who understood the supply chain knew it was actually a solid cash-in-hand side hustle. Before wood pulp paper was invented, paper mills made their product from cotton and linen rags. Old shirts, torn dresses, worn-out bedsheets, all of it had real market value by the pound. Rag pickers collected worn fabric from households and sold it to mills that processed it into paper. The demand was constant because newspapers, books, and business documents all required it, and the raw material was just sitting in people's rag bags. Bone grubbing was another scavenger hustle that paid surprisingly well for anyone willing to do the unglamorous work of collecting it. Animal bones from butchers, from slaughterhouses, and from fields where livestock had died were worth real money to two completely different industries. Ground bone became bone meal fertilizer for farms, and processed bone was a key ingredient in fine bone china. Scavengers built regular collection routes, often working with local butchers who were happy to have someone haul away material they would otherwise have to dispose of themselves. It was a service hustle disguised as a scavenging hustle. As the railroad network exploded across America after the Civil War, it created an accidental income stream for sharp-eyed people living near the tracks. Steam locomotives burned raw coal, and the vibration of the cars caused chunks of it to bounce off and scatter along the rail bed for miles. Kids and side hustlers walked those tracks with buckets and sacks, collecting dropped coal to heat their own homes through the winter or sell to neighbors who needed it. It required no tools, no permission, and no capital, just time, a good eye, and a willingness to walk the line. Mudlarking is one of those hustles that sounds almost too simple to be real, but it was a recognized occupation in every port city in America and England throughout the 1800s. At low tide, the riverbanks and mudflats near busy docks were littered with dropped iron nails, tools, rope, coins, and hardware that had fallen off ships and loading docks. Mudlarks waded in and collected whatever the river gave up. Iron nails alone were valuable enough to make the effort worthwhile, because hand-forged nails were expensive and any builder or carpenter would buy a bucket of good used ones without hesitation. Ginseng digging was one of the most lucrative foraging hustles in Appalachian America, and it had a global supply chain attached to it that most people never knew existed. Wild American ginseng root was in enormous demand in China, where it was considered a premium medicinal root, and American merchants were happy to pay Appalachian foragers good money for dried roots they could export. Families in the mountain hollows of Virginia, Kentucky, and the Carolinas supplemented their farm income every fall by digging wild ginseng and drying the roots for sale. The knowledge of where to find it was passed down like a trade secret. Market hunting was a hustle that fed the rapidly growing cities of the 1800s and paid well for anyone with a decent eye and a steady hand. Before factory farming existed, city restaurants and hotels needed a constant supply of fresh game, and they bought it from local hunters who delivered directly to the kitchen door. Waterfowl, wild turkey, and other game were sold by the piece or by the pound. A skilled hunter with knowledge of local habitat could fill a wagon and make more in a single trip to the city market than a farmhand made in a week of labor. Worm and bait catching is so simple it almost feels like a joke, but it was a legitimate cash-in-hand odd job that worked in every small town near a river, lake, or pond. Fishermen needed bait, and they needed it fresh. A kid or a side hustler who dug worms early in the morning and walked down to the fishing spots by sunrise could sell out completely before 8 in the morning. No overhead, no tools beyond a tin can and a shovel, and a customer base that showed up at the same spot every single day. This one got buried, but it never stopped working. Pest bounty hunting was a hustle that local governments essentially funded themselves, and it paid in hard cash with no negotiation required. Towns and counties across America posted bounties for wolf pelts, coyote pelts, and in city environments even rat tails, because overpopulation of these animals caused real economic damage to farms and food supplies. A trapper who knew the local terrain could bring in multiple pelts a week and collect the posted bounty at the county office like clockwork. It was government-funded odd-job work before anyone had invented that phrase. Winter nail making is a hustle that reveals something important about how pre-industrial families thought about time. In the early 1800s, machine-cut nails were not yet widely available, and hand-forged iron nails were in constant demand from builders and carpenters. Farm families who had a small forge and a supply of iron rod would spend their winter evenings, when field work was impossible, hammering out nails by the hundreds. They sold them to the local hardware dealer or directly to builders come spring. The cold months that looked like downtime were actually a production window, and the smartest families treated them that way. Shoe pegging was a cottage industry that required nothing more than a sharp knife and patience, and it kept families earning through the slow seasons. Before machine stitching took over the shoe industry, cobblers attached soles to uppers using tiny hand-whittled wooden pegs, and they needed thousands of them constantly. Families would sit around the table in the evenings and whittle pegs by the bucketful from dry hardwood scraps, then sell them by the pound to the local cobbler or shoe shop. It was repetitive, it required no special skill beyond basic whittling, and it produced a steady trickle of income that added up over a long winter. The boarding house hustle was one of the most reliable income strategies available to widows and working families in the industrial 1800s, and the Lowell mill towns of Massachusetts made it famous. Young women who came to work the textile mills needed somewhere to sleep, and mill operators actually required approved boarding houses for their workers. A widow or family with spare rooms could take in 4, 6, or 8 mill girls, charge weekly room and board, and generate more stable monthly income than most wage workers earned. The mill bells rang at 4:30 in the morning, and the boarders were out the door before sunrise, leaving the house quiet for the operator to manage the next day. Mining town laundry work is one of the clearest examples in American history of a service hustle that printed money because the customer had no alternative. In boom towns like Victor, Colorado, the real gold rush was not in the mines. It was in the washtub. Thousands of single male miners worked brutal shifts and came home caked in dirt, and they had neither the time nor the domestic skills to wash their own clothes. A woman with 2 washtubs, a fire, and a clothesline could charge premium rates and have more customers than she could handle. The miners paid without complaint because clean work clothes were a necessity, not a luxury. The mining town baker hustle worked on the exact same logic as the laundress, just with flour instead of soap. Single male miners in boom towns were a captive market for anyone who could cook because they had no time, no equipment, and often no real cooking skills after a 12-hour shift underground. A person who could bake pies, bread, and simple pastries and sell them at the mine entrance or through a small storefront was selling something that felt like a luxury, but was really a necessity. The margins on baked goods sold to a hungry, cash-flush, time-starved mining crew were genuinely impressive. Toll road operating was a hustle that required some upfront labor, but then generated passive income in a way that feels almost modern. An enterprising farmer who owned land near a difficult river crossing or a muddy stretch of road could build a simple bridge or graded turnpike, post a sign, and charge a few cents per wagon to pass. Travelers paid willingly because the alternative was losing a wheel in the mud or fording a dangerous creek. The farmer collected coins all day while his neighbors struggled. It was infrastructure arbitrage, and it worked because the farmer saw a problem everyone else just complained about. Droving was the original gig economy job, and it required nothing but your legs, your time, and the ability to keep animals moving in the right direction. Farmers who needed to get their turkeys, hogs, or cattle to distant markets often hired drovers to walk the animals there for them, because they could not leave their farms unattended for a week-long journey. A drover who knew the roads and the watering holes could move a herd of pigs 20 miles a day and collect a cut of the sale price at the end of the drive. Word of mouth was the only marketing that mattered, and a reliable drover was worth his weight in repeat business. The lamplighter was one of those town jobs that paid modestly but consistently, and it illustrates how infrastructure created employment at every level before centralized systems took over. Every evening at dusk, the lamplighter walked a fixed route through town, using a long pole to ignite each gas street lamp one by one, and returned at dawn to extinguish them. It required punctuality, local knowledge, and nothing else. Towns depended on this person the way we depend on a utility company today. The Rural Electrification Act of 1936 eventually made the job obsolete, but for decades it was steady, reliable, walking distance odd-job income. The local telephone switchboard operator is a hustle that existed right at the bleeding edge of new technology and community trust, and it is one of the most fascinating on this entire list. In the late 1800s, telephone exchanges were small enough that a family could run one from their living room, connecting calls manually by plugging cables into a board. The operator knew every subscriber by voice, every business by name, and served as the communications backbone of the entire community. It was a technology hustle that required zero technical training beyond learning the board, and it paid because the community had no other option. The final hustle on this list is the most cautionary, and it is worth understanding exactly why it belongs here. Leech gathering was a real occupation in the 1800s, with people wading into ponds to collect leeches that doctors purchased for bloodletting, which was a mainstream medical practice of the era that has since been thoroughly discredited by modern medicine. Patent medicine selling was equally widespread, with traveling salesmen marketing homemade tonics of unknown and often dangerous ingredients to desperate people. Both were profitable hustles precisely because they exploited fear and ignorance. The lesson is not to replicate them. The lesson is to recognize that a market existing does not make a product legitimate. Here is what connects every single one of these 20 hustles, and it is the thing that most modern income content completely misses. Not one of these people was waiting for a platform to launch, a certification to arrive, or a market to give them permission. They looked at what their community needed, what they personally had access to, and they closed the gap. Ash, bones, ice, rags, worms, pies, a washtub, a switchboard in the parlor. The raw material was always right there. The only variable was whether the person saw it or walked past it. Your grandparents already solved this problem. We just stopped listening. If you made it this far, here is your one takeaway to actually act on this week. Pick any hustle from this list and ask yourself one question. What is the modern version of the gap this filled? Ash collecting was arbitrage between waste and industry. Boarding houses were housing arbitrage. Droving was logistics for people who needed it. Every one of these is a template, not a relic. If you want more episodes like this one, subscribe and hit the bell, because next week we are going into Depression-era income strategies that are even more directly applicable to the world we are living in right now. Old hustle, new money. I'll see you there.